the issue is that when that's done constantly and you're eating too many carbs and you're constantly having blood sugar, then you constantly have this insulin secretion and you can become insulin insensitive. And that it's that insulin insensitivity that really affects longevity. It really affects metabolic function.
The Boom Show is produced by the team at Burg CrossFit. So please don't sue us. All of the recordings and materials in this podcast are for educational purposes only and should not be considered as a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Let's just get smarter and sweat together. Cool? All right, let's go.
Booda bop, booda bop, booda bop, beep bop. Again, that's the beginning of the Boom Show. Welcome, you guys. We have your host, Tony. Amy is unfortunately not able to make it, but I am accompanied by our head of nutrition, Sara Avren, and we are also sitting here with our guest, Vin Petronelli. And hopefully I said that correctly again. So welcome, Vin. Welcome, Sara.
How's it going, man?
Hello.
We are going to be talking about basically a cellular level, how our cellular level breaks down into our genetic makeup, along with nutrition, exercise, a lot of very interesting things that Vin has been studying. He's going to give a little bit of a background on himself here in just a second and probably describe that way better than I just did. So, Vin, tell us kind of where you're from, what you do for a living, and what you're going to tell us about today in a very tight nutshell.
Sure. So yeah, Vin Petronelli. I'm from Scituate, Rhode Island, a little small town up in New England. I've been a nurse for 10 years. I worked in the ER trauma room up there at a level 1 trauma center for about 5 years, and I've been in various ICUs since moving to Florida, from cardiac ICU, neuro ICU, medical ICU, and I'm currently in a master's program for Nurse Practitioner. Which basically, I decided to do because I'm taking care of patients on their sickest deathbed, but my true passion is prevention, and I wanted to figure out how to get to patients before they end up in the ICU, and figure out if there's a way that we can prevent a lot of these chronic diseases that people are dying from today. So I just wanted to go back to school to help people maximize their wellness and learn about aging, learn about cancer prevention, learn about chronic disease, and but also to take people who are being healthy, who are already working out, already trying to do the right things for nutrition, and sort of take it to the next level. So that's where I really started to get into this.
Very cool. So it's been 10 years you've been doing nursing. Now you're diving into your practitioner, and that's where you kind of are diving really deep into this cellular level of genetics, I guess.
Yeah, genetics certainly plays a part in longevity. It certainly plays a part, but essentially what we're looking at is health span, lifespan. I think that there's a lot of science out there that is showing we can increase the lifespan and health span of a lot of different species, and where there's currently a lot of trials going on for humans. So I was working on my master's degree, I was working on a paper for diabetes, and I started down a rabbit hole with metabolic disease, which is kind of the underlying foundation of diabetes, is metabolic dysfunction, sugar and insulin dysregulation, and started realizing how it's basically, there's a unifying theory that aging, chronic disease, stress, how we handle different things in our lives, how we sleep, it all kind of plays a part in chronic disease, how we feel. So I ended up running into someone who volunteers at a lab at USF. So I had the opportunity of doing some metabolic research at USF in the Department of Molecular Pharmacology, and psychology with Dom and Chilla D'Agostino, which has been just incredible. And they brought me to the metabolic conference last year out in LA, which was all about longevity science and how not only to live longer, but live healthier, which is really what we're all kind of our main goal here. So
obviously you've been in the fitness industry or been in CrossFit, let's say, and you've been a long-time member here at Burg. So kind of tying that into, we obviously have Sara here with nutrition, tying those two aspects into the science of now what you're learning, really, right? And how to optimize all those things.
Yeah, my goal is to, with my background in doing like actual like cellular research out of college, and then doing a lot of literature review of articles that's been posted, institutions that are putting out research. My goal is, once I'm a practitioner in Florida, you can be an independent practitioner. So I can be your primary care provider. Just like you go to a doctor, a lot of you go to the doctors, and a lot of times you'll see a nurse practitioner or a PA, but in Florida, they just passed that you can have independent practice. So my goal would be to, people who want to not just get the basic surface level blood work and get your vital signs and then just get okay, you're fine. I want to take care of the people that are like, okay, but what else? What let's dive deeper. There's a lot of blood work, a lot of biomarkers that we can look at that your doctor does not ever, it's not covered by insurance, or your doctor doesn't understand how to read it. And this is just what I do. And this is what I think I can bring to the table, is kind of taking the research side and then adding it into real practical application, not only in healthcare, but in the fitness community. So I want to enhance the fitness community and just healthcare. So we're not just going to the doctor and them just saying, all right, you're fine, see you later. But, let's dive a little deeper and really try to prevent some of the diseases that you might be at risk for based on your genetics and your family history, what you're eating, what you grew up eating, what your environment is like. So that's really the goal here. So
maybe I'm jumping the gun, but what are some of those biomarkers that you're specifically looking at when you do these tests, when you do blood work? I mean, that you would.
Yeah. So there's a lot of biomarkers that we can look at, but a little bit jumping the gun. We'll get there.
We'll back up.
But it's super interesting. There's some of the three major diseases that we all die from are cardiovascular disease, cancer, and metabolic disease. So diabetes, which are all kind of related to like Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative diseases. So you're looking at biomarkers for those diseases. So cardiovascular disease, you go to the doctor and they're going to do a lipid panel, for example, which is it's a cholesterol panel, but you're looking at lipids. And they look at your LDL, which is your bad cholesterol. But what they're looking at is your total mass of LDL cholesterol. They're not looking at particle number. There's a HDL cholesterol, which is considered the good cholesterol, which is a total fallacy. They have no idea what HDL actually does or means. And it's really not your quote unquote good cholesterol. There's people with low HDL that live into their 80s and 90s and have very minimal atherosclerosis and, pathogenesis in their cardiovascular system. And insulin, for example, with diabetes, there's there's biomarkers, I should say, that go a lot deeper than just that lipid panel when it comes to your cardiovascular health. We know a lot more about that, and there's more that we can dive into. Just because your LDL is elevated does not mean, your LDL-C is elevated does not mean you are at risk. There's other tests that need to be done. ApoB is one of them. It's a protein that wraps your LDL cholesterol. It's much more indicative, I should say, of cardiovascular disease. They look at blood sugar as an indicator for diabetes. They don't look at insulin, but we know that insulin and insulin resistance is related more to, or is more indicative of metabolic dysfunction than your sugar specifically. Sugar is a much later sign of metabolic dysfunction than insulin, and we can test your insulin response and have an idea of what's really going on a cellular level in your body. But it's a little bit of a process. It's a little bit more costly than just a quick blood sugar, so they just don't do it. Hormone levels are another one. They have specific ranges. That's the other thing, is a lot of it is reference range. So you'll look at your liver enzymes, for example, your AST and your ALT, and they might be quote unquote within normal range, but what I would consider proper liver function is I want those liver enzymes a lot lower than what your doctor might say. So your doctor might say, oh yeah, your liver enzymes are fine. I'm going to look at it and say, there's something going on there. You have like NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is driven by glucose and insulin resistance.
So when you say that, when you back up a little bit, when you say doctors will say you're in normal range, are you more or less stating that the general population is at the normal range is not where it should be, or really? Yes. I mean, in reality, I hate not to be harsh, I guess, but it's like the normal is really not normal.
Yeah.
It's just
so those reference ranges have actually fluctuated over time, and they're based on the average for that population at that lab. So if the entire country or the entire population has a less healthy liver and their enzyme, so they'll widen the range of that, and that just because the average is higher doesn't mean that you're optimizing your liver function.
Yeah.
Right.
As an example.
Yeah, that's. I was talking to another member about a topic of that nature today, and it was just kind of, we were laughing about it, how a doctor's telling him that this is, his normal is way off from what the normal actually is, so.
Yeah, I mean, and it can be, and sometimes it's okay, and sometimes it's really not okay, and you really need to understand what you're looking at. We see it all the time. I mean I do this now in the clinic, and I see we look at the blood sugar. We look at your A1C, which is the average of your blood sugar over the last 120 days or so. The life of a red blood cell is what that is. And then we look at a snapshot of your glucose, and if it's just, basically the cutoff for diabetes is 6.5. I mean, but if it's 5.9 or 6.0, we say, yep, it's fine. Yep, okay. But really, your blood sugar should be like 5.5. Your A1C should be 5.5 or so, or less. It should be under 100. But they're just saying, like, when you get to 6.5, your blood sugar is like 130 as an average. You have serious dysfunction. Wow. We're not treating that for the most part, until you reach that. And that's a problem. That's a problem.
Yeah, it just seems like doctors are more focused on immediate care rather than you, and your direction is more preventative. Like, let's not wait till something happens. Yeah. Let's take the red flags that we're seeing and run with it and prevent actual, X, Y, and Z from happening. So
100%.
Which is huge.
And some doctors and practitioners are certainly better at it. I mean, they definitely teach you, that you should start like talking about lifestyle modification and everything. When you start getting up there, it's just not necessarily practical in traditional healthcare when you're seeing your physician for like 15-20 minutes at most. I mean, a lot of it isn't their fault. I mean, some of it is for sure. Some of it is the doctor's just lazy and doesn't want to talk about it. A lot of it is the patients don't care. But I think that we certainly can. There's definitely room for improvement. We definitely can move in the right direction, and that's where I want to go with this.
Cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
So I kind of wanted to get into, what longevity is, what health span is, just so we can kind of lay that foundation. Basically, if you are not, all right, let's put it this way. If you are eating as much as you want of whatever you want, whenever you want it, that is the standard American diet. That's the sad diet. We can't do it. So that's unfortunately a problem. You have to restrict.
Are you laughing because you relate to this?
No.
Okay.
People joke that I don't have the best diet, but I do eat very clean.
You do.
Do I have ice cream every once in a while? Yes.
There's nothing wrong with those.
I just, so a lot of my family's in the construction business, and I know a lot of construction workers. They're going to down here Wawa's or wherever, they're going to the gas station pubs and getting roller meat and energy drinks and just like but that's the norm. Or sometimes they don't
Yep.
eat breakfast, and I'm just sitting there thinking like, maybe that's an extreme, but I also think that's pretty normal for a lot of people.
I drive home,
And
a lot of times I work nights, and I drive home and I look at in the McDonald's parking lot, the Dunkin' Donuts I mean, the
Slammed,
lines
right?
are
Yeah.
out the door, and that, I mean, it's just incredibly disheartening to see that that's where America is and where it's going. And I mean, that is one thing if you're having that for breakfast, like, you know, once a month or so, because you ran out of time. But you know, if that is your standard diet, you are doing damage on a cellular level that is just, I mean, it's so profound, like it's sad. To put it this way, the average age of an American, the average age that people live to in America, or generally in the world, give or take, is about 77 years old. So it's not necessarily which side of 77 you want to be on. We can make you live really long time. I see this every day in the ICU. We can put you on a machine and make you live for a long time. We can breathe for you. We can supplement your kidney function with dialysis machines. We can do a lot to keep you alive. The question is, when you're in your last 10, 15, 20 years of life, how do you want to feel?
Right.
You know, it's not just whether or not you get to 77, it's whether or not, you know, you feel good doing it. Do you want to be in a nursing home? You want to be hunched over? You want to be in a wheelchair? You want to feel like crap and have, you know, joint pain and all of those issues? Or do you want to be doing the things you love, enjoying your grandkids, your great grandkids, enjoying your family? And that's really like what, for me, this is all about. I mean, I saw my grandparents, they're 85 and like 83, and they've been retired now, and they have literally lived a third life. They grew up, life one, they raised a family, that was life two, and now they've been in retirement, and they have absolutely enjoyed it. And the reason is because they really did prioritize health. They're in their whole lives. They've exercised a little bit. They've tried to eat very healthy. So so that's what, you know, kind of inspired me in a lot of ways. Is I look at them in their 80s and I'm like, oh my God. I mean, they were like, my grandfather was like running around with me, you know, not too long ago. Like, you know, it's just, so it's pretty inspiring. So yeah, I mean, it's not just about longevity and lifespan. It's not just about living to 77 years old. It's about your health span and optimizing your health during that time.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between your chronological age and your biological age. Your chronological age is obviously, you know, you were born, everybody just says, hey, how old are you? And your biological age is like your functional capacity. It's like, how old are your cells at their level? So you can be 30 years old and have cells that are like more like a 25-year-old, or you can be 30 years old and have cells that are more like a 40-year-old. And we now can measure that on a cellular level.
That's really cool. You talked to me and Sarah about that earlier, and I was like, I mean, you see that in people. You see people that are like, I mean, I know Trey said, he's like, yeah, I've hung out with my fraternity brothers, and they're all like, probably like 20 years older than I am. And he's like, I don't get it, you know? And you see that in other people that you're like, how old are you? And you're like, oh, I would never have guessed that. You look like 20 years younger than that.
So it's basically like, the analogy I use is like a car. One of the, you know, other than price, obviously, when you go to buy a car, one of the first two questions you ask, what year is it and how many miles are on it? But we don't do that with humans. We just ask how old you are. And that's what you're essentially doing, is you're asking the biological age of a car when you're asking how many miles are on it. I bought a 2011 Jetta outright that had like 40,000 miles on it. So it's like its biological age was very young compared to the actual chronological age of the car. Yeah. And we can do that now with humans. It's they call it it's basically you're testing methylation at the cellular level for you're testing so mostly it's blood cells, but for the most part they can look at a lot of different cells in the body. They look at the DNA and methylation pattern on the DNA, and they can determine whether or not how old that your actual cell is. Do you have a methylation pattern of an older or younger person in your chronological age? It's called the Horvath clock, if any of you want to look that up, Horvath, I think. And yeah, it tests methylation patterns. So it's pretty interesting how that all works. But yeah, it's super cool.
Obviously, this is what you're getting into. Is it's genetic, it's health, nutrition, all that stuff combined, right? I mean, it's
So there's a lot of components to it. Certainly your genetics have a part. I want to get to that in 2 seconds. I just want to mention that. So a lot of this comes down to metabolic function. A lot of it depends on what you eat, how you sleep, how you handle stress, whether or not you exercise. All of that taps into your metabolism. And it's basically what that essentially means is that there's a balance between your metabolism is a balance between a catabolic state and an anabolic state. So your catabolic state is a breakdown. Think of it as like conservation of energy. You're sort of depleted. Your anabolic state is gains. Think building, growing muscle, and that is what your metabolism is that balance. At the center of that is a lot of it comes down to insulin. It's the unifying theory of aging. A lot of it comes down to insulin, and there's a few quotes out there. One of them I like is that you age at the rate that you secrete insulin. So insulin, to kind of tie it into genetics, we'll do a quick overview of biology, but we have our organs. Our organs are made up of tissue, and our tissue is made up of cells. And then there's different components of the cell. There's the nucleus, which holds our DNA. They store the majority of our DNA. But we have mitochondria, which is an organelle within the cell. And that's important because when we grew up, we always thought, okay, mitochondria is the battery of the cell. It's just where we create energy. That's how we all thought of it.
The mighty mitochondria.
The mighty mitochondria, right? It was the battery that, I remember, like literally in the textbook, like in high school or whatever, it had like a little battery inside of it so you knew that you got your energy from the mitochondria. But what we've learned is that your mitochondria has its own DNA, and your mitochondria is actually a signaling organelle when basically it regulates that metabolism. So it's not just the DNA and the genetics within the nucleus. It comes down to the DNA and within the mitochondria, and whether or not we exercise, what we eat, what's around us, and our stress hormones, for example, all affect the mitochondria and determine what the mitochondria is going to do and how the mitochondria is going to regulate our metabolism. And that's where a lot of this aging stuff comes down to. If you've heard, I don't know, there's a lot of like NAD infusions, telomere length. A lot of that is like, you got to protect your mitochondria function. So I wanted to kind of throw that out so we have an idea that a lot of this it comes down to how it affects your mitochondria function. So where does genetics fit in? Well, genetics fit in the sense that you can't control what genes you have, the genes that are held within your nucleus, in the nucleus of your cell. But what you can do is you can affect how your genes are expressed, and that's called epigenetics. So our DNA and our DNA code, we have different variations. There's what they're called there's SNPs for short. There's single nucleotide polymorphisms. They're sequences within our DNA, and how we live our life and our lifestyle determines whether those SNPs are turned on or turned off. And I'll just give you like one quick analogy of how this works. So people think, okay, I have a DNA or a genetic predisposition to diabetes or cancer or something. And that's true. Like what that is it means that your switch could be turned on or turned off really easily. But that doesn't mean you are predestined to having cancer or having diabetes. It depends on how you live your life. So this study, just really quick, there was a study that they looked at to see if someone had, if someone had a certain gene, it's the 5-HTT gene, if they would have depression. And the hypothesis was, okay, if you have the bad variant of this gene, obviously you're going to have an increased risk of depression, right? Okay, yep, we know genetics, this is how genetics work. You're predestined, your genes say that you're going to have depression, most likely you're going to have depression. But what they found is that having the bad variant of the gene didn't have any factor on whether or not you had the diagnosis of depression. What mattered was whether or not you were exposed to an event, like a childhood trauma or something like that.
To trigger?
To trigger. You need to trigger your genes and to turn them on or turn them off. So if you have a predisposition to cancer, now there's certain ones that are very strong, like the BRCA gene, for example, it's linked to breast cancer in women. That's a very powerful predisposition. There's not a whole lot that, your risk is very, very, very high. That's a quick switch. But diabetes, a lot of cardiovascular disease, there's certain ones that you can certainly affect, and you can keep that switch off depending on how you live your life.
Now, on that, in relation to study, maybe you don't know this answer, I guess, but how much of that is, I guess, mental growth that you say you have a traumatic event that then affects that area of that gene, but you build it, people handle stress. I guess you're relating this to a stressful situation, and how people handle that stress is obviously different. And I've listened to and heard different examples of, if you believe stress is bad, it will be bad. If you believe stress is good and helps you grow, for instance, the stress of weights on your body to build muscle as another example, then if you believe in that, then it's a mindset. So I guess more or less developing your mindset to negate these areas and other.
For sure. I mean, that's why a lot of it comes down to mental or how we handle stress, our sleep, whether or not we exercise. So as an example, if you're sleeping well and you get good quality sleep, you're able to handle stress better. If you exercise, studies literally show that you're more mentally resilient. I just put that on my Instagram recently. There's a study that showed that if you exercise, essentially and you go through a stressful event in the near future, you are more resilient to that. So you can look at that on a hormone level. So if you have someone with a bad mindset and you are exposed to a stressful event, your cortisol level, your stress hormone might shoot up, your heart rate might spike. But if you are exercising and trying to manage stress and getting good sleep and eating well, you are more mentally and emotionally resilient to these stressors that happen in your life. So some stress is productive stress, getting me, a test. It can be motivational. So you can have stress that's motivational. We got a comp coming up. I mean, I know that you're really stressed out about it because you guys don't want to lose to Dan and I. and Tanya, Dan and Tanya and Jackie are shooting for you and Ryan and Brittany. But
it's a healthy stress.
Yeah, that's a healthy stress. But then there's stress that's not healthy, and that's a matter of mindset and coping. And sure, that's the stuff that healthy or chronic stress, for example, will definitely spike your cortisol. It will deplete your organs that you end up in where you're basically chronically stressed, and then you're just inflamed, your body is stressed out, and your cells are stressed out and not very healthy. So we've established that. So right now we've basically established that there's a biological versus chronological age. There's a health span versus lifespan. We've kind of talked about our genes. We talked about the secretion a little bit of insulin. So just quick refresher on insulin. When we eat carbohydrates, we take in carbohydrates, and our body breaks it down into sugar, pushes it into our bloodstream, and the blood carries it around to different organs and tissues, including your muscle, your liver, your heart, to use as energy. And your body then secretes insulin, so and insulin pushes the glucose into the cell, so that way it can actually be used for energy. The issue is that when that's done constantly, and you're eating too many carbs and you're constantly having blood sugar, then you constantly have this insulin secretion and you can become insulin insensitive. And that it's that insulin insensitivity that really affects longevity. It really affects metabolic function and affects the health of our cell. That's really like at the root of that. So that's how insulin works. That's why so much of the research right now is focused on metabolic function, and that's why one of the pretty much one of the main things that when you go to the doctor, what they're going to look at your insulin, or your blood glucose, because it's kind of a proxy for your insulin levels.
Maybe random, but when do you recommend people get blood work? Specific ages?
Well, they pretty much do it. They do it annually, and that's okay. It's good to get blood work annually. The issue is, or my problem with it is that they're not testing enough of the biomarkers that we need to really get an idea of what's going on.
And that's your goal, obviously, is to be able to test those other biomarkers. But let's say somebody right now wants to go, like, what do they say? Hey, I want you to test my more biomarkers. Like,
so you can get an ApoB. So if you want to go to the doctor and you want to get a better idea of what your health is, and the doctors kind of look at you and kind of laugh, but you can get a CRP, which is a C-reactive protein. It's a general marker for inflammation. You can get a homocysteine, which is also a marker of inflammation. That's super important. You can ask for a LDL particle number at the very least, preferably an ApoB count is something that they should do. That's a much stronger indication for cardiovascular disease. You can get a uric acid level. It would, especially if you have high blood pressure, I strongly suggest a homocysteine and a uric acid level. And I would get what they call LP little a. It's LP and then in parentheses little a, which is it's a little part of your lipid panel, your cholesterol panel. It's kind of a little tag that hangs out on your LDL cholesterol, but it's strongly associated with premature cardiovascular disease. So if you have a history where your brothers, your dad, your uncles are all having heart attacks in their 40s and 50s, even early 60s, I would strongly recommend an LP little a. You only need to get it once in your life. Once you just need to know whether you have an elevated LP little a or not. But those are some of the strong, those are the biomarkers that I would absolutely ask for. Ferritin is, kind of okay. It's an indicator of inflammation. That's fine. That's pretty cheap, and a lot of places do that anyway. And then I would try to get an insulin level. The problem with that is most places won't do it. You have to go to the lab. You have to take a set amount of glucose intake. You have to eat, it's like 75 grams or something of glucose. And then they will test your blood sugar and your insulin levels at like 30 minutes, 60 minutes. And you have to sort of ask for this. It's something that you'd have to pay for. But it would be really helpful if you can get that at like 30, 60, 90 in 2 hours, something like that. That's going to tell you a lot about your metabolic function.
I guess, is there on top of that, other than talking to you about it, I mean, who would the doctor that you're asking for all this would be appropriate to kind of go over that stuff, or more or less, is there a specialist?
You don't need a specialist. Your primary care doctor should be able to go over that. It just depends on your doctor, how much they know about it, how much they're into this research, how up to date are they, how much time they have. So that's a tough question, because mainstream, they're just, a lot of physicians are going to look at you and so I don't have a great answer for that. It really depends on your doctor. But if you're able to get that lab, or you're willing to pay for those, and you want to come talk to me, by all means. I can't give medical advice today. No patient provider relationship has been established. This is for informational purposes.
But you can read off a blood panel or whatever.
Yeah, but I mean, as a friend, if you want to bring that stuff to me, I can give you some guidance for sure.
Cool.
So yeah, and then some of this, is we can get into the weeds of a lot of this, but there are different pathways now, cellular pathways that are linked to aging and linked to cellular repair. And I just want to briefly go over what they are, and maybe we can get into how to really manipulate them, like maybe on another time, or if people have questions about them. But there are a few different pathways that I put here. When you asked the question last time, what do I mean by pathway? And I had to really think about it because each one is very individual, but they're mechanisms or a method that your body uses to regulate its aging, and is the best way I can describe it. So some of the pathways enhance DNA repair. Some of them regulate metabolism. Some of them improve or regulate inflammation. It just depends on the specific pathway that we're talking about. So one of the pathways is sirtuins. They were discovered by David Sinclair, is a PhD physician that runs a lab at MIT and Harvard, and he just put out a book within the last year or so, and they've done a lot of research on DNA repair and aging and anti-aging science. Great book to get into, but it's what they discovered is that sirtuins act inside of a cell, and they have two functions. One is DNA repair, and the other is gene silencing. So if you have a gene, like a cancer gene hanging out, their sirtuins are going to silence that cancer gene, so the switch is always off. But if you have some DNA repair, those sirtuins also have to go and fix the DNA. And then they're supposed to go back, and you hope that they go back to silencing that cancer gene. The problem is that we're constantly getting, we call hits on your DNA. If we're constantly exposed to environmental toxins, if we're constantly stressed, if we're constantly not sleeping well, if we're eating McDonald's and drinking Coca-Cola and getting chemicals into our system, the sirtuins have to essentially leave their post of silencing cancer, and they have to go fix the hits on the DNA. They can't do both at the same time. And they can actually see this through a microscope. They can see the sirtuin leaving and going across and fixing DNA.
Yeah.
So that is one of the pathways to aging. What they found is when you activate your sirtuins, when you keep your sirtuins healthy and active, your cells are healthier, and you can keep your cell healthier and decrease the risk for chronic disease, including cancer.
Sirtuins are a part of the cell?
Yeah, I guess I don't know the best way to describe them. It's like a little peptide within the cell.
Okay.
There's a lot written on that, and we could get into it. I mean, we could basically talk about sirtuins for another hour, but we'll pass on that for today. mTOR is another pathway. It's the mechanistic target of rapamycin, and without really getting into the weeds, but that is your master regulator of cell metabolism. It's responsible for basically it's a cell survival protein regulator. And so if you have it senses external nutrients and growth factors, and determines whether or not you are depleted or if you have an abundance of these nutrients. And what you want is you want to suppress or inhibit the action of mTOR. When mTOR is activated, it's a driver for disease. So the goal is to inhibit mTOR. So discoveries have found that mTOR pathway, when it's activated, it activates for various cell responses that are disease drivers, like tumor formation, angiogenesis, and insulin resistance. So we want to keep our mTOR sort of suppressed and down as much as we can. Just a side note, one way to do that is CrossFit. HIIT training suppresses mTOR and inhibits mTOR. So that is why HIIT training, high intensity interval training like CrossFit, is really healthy. It's a mTOR inhibitor.
Cool.
AMPK is a signaling enzyme. They kind of work hand in hand. mTOR and AMPK, they sort of sense different nutrients within the body, but AMPK, unlike mTOR that you want to inhibit, AMPK you want to activate. So it's a signaling enzyme that when it's activated, it keeps your cells healthy. It's the best way I can describe it. And autophagy and apoptosis, one of my favorite things. That's why I'm wearing this shirt. I know you can't see that, but my shirt says autophagy sells itself, cells, cells, because it's just super nerdy and clever. Basically what that is this is super cool. So when your cells are sick, they cause your body, they're programmed for cell suicide. So if you have a cell that's kind of damaged, the idea is that it's basically going to self-destruct. That's apoptosis. You want to trigger that as much as possible. Obviously, you want as many cells, sick cells, to die off on their own, so that way just your healthy cells exist, because a sick cell that hangs around can turn into a cancer cell. That's the idea. So you want to trigger apoptosis, and autophagy is what it is that it's basically like a force field around your cells. So what they found was cells that are stressed, I should say acute stress, meaning like when you're working out and you're going through a really hard workout, when you're going through like hot and cold therapy, like sauna and cold showers and ice baths, that acute stress, not like, oh my God, I'm going through this crazy stressful time in my life and you're chronically stressed. That triggers autophagy, which basically means your cells get these like I said, force fields around them that protect them, so they can actually exist in an environment of a lot of stress and really low nutrient availability. So that's what autophagy and apoptosis is. Autophagy is like your force field around your cells. You want to trigger that. And apoptosis, when you trigger autophagy, the healthy cells will upregulate these force fields. They're dual membrane around the cell. They can actually see this on a microscope, autophagy being triggered.
Oh, that's cool.
And it will trigger this apoptosis. So a sick cell can't really upregulate autophagy properly. So they kill off themselves, and that way you have you're left with healthy cells. And there's different ways you can do that. There's different mechanisms. One is intermittent fasting, calorie restriction. Again, it's a super complicated process if you've never done it before. So don't just deprive yourself of calories when you hear this podcast, but there's a proper way of doing that. But you can trigger autophagy and apoptosis by taking yourself through a protocol for calorie restriction. And then cell senescence, I think, is one of the coolest things. So a senescent cell is a zombie cell. They just kind of float around. They're no longer active. They can't reproduce anymore. But what they do is they secrete or release, in other words, is inflammatory markers like cytokines and growth factors that cause inflammation. So when you have an abundance of senescent cells floating around, you're going to be chronically inflamed. And so what you want to do is trigger apoptosis to prevent cell senescence. So what they've done is, and granted, I will say this, that there's a little bit difference with children and during development than as you get older. So, you get a 10-year-old, don't start, reading the stuff and giving them supplements and having them do prolonged fast, because it's very different between children and an older adult. But basically what they found is if you do not have cancer, you take a healthy person and you go through, you can give them certain supplements and you trigger some of these pathways. Cell senescence, when you go through apoptosis, you're basically killing off senescent cells to the point that they can actually see some of your organs shrink. So like actual mass of, say, your kidneys and liver will actually shrink down a little bit when you go through apoptosis, massive apoptosis. You're killing off these sick zombie senescent cells. And that way only your really healthy cells can grow back when you start refeeding. So that puts you So now you just have, you're left with healthy cells and a lot less inflammation. So those are the basic pathways of longevity. There's a lot more. Like we started kind of talking about genetics, and there's telomeres, lengthening, and there's a lot. But these are a few pathways that have been research-based. They've shown on a cellular level and in research that you can, by manipulating these pathways, you can make different species live longer. We've done it in yeast. We've done it in flies. We've done it in mice. And there's currently trials going on in humans and like more complex species like dogs to determine whether or not we can have them live longer. And they've made mice live 20% longer. So imagine we do that to a human. And of course, the first thing that everybody asks is, okay, well, you made them live longer, but what they've done is they've delayed chronic disease in all of these species. So not only are they making them live longer, but they're incredibly healthy. And they've done age markers or age testing on these animals. So like mice, for example, they'll have super shiny coats. They're active. We've been able to increase and make them their better memory, better cognitive function in mice. They've put them on a wheel, and they have better neuromotor skills. So they can stay on a wheel, they can run on a wheel longer at their age. So they're not just living longer, they're living longer and healthier.
That's cool.
That is really cool.
So yeah, there's no one size fits all. A lot of this is individual based. It depends on a lot of those biomarkers. It depends on a lot of your genetics. There are basic things that we can all do. CrossFit is certainly one of them. Being at a healthy body composition is certainly one of them. But there's a lot of factors. There's a lot of different strategies that we have to implement, and some of it is basic. We can all do, like working out and eating a healthy diet. And then there's other stuff that we can do that that you can kind of take your health to the next level. And that's kind of a discussion for another day.
Sure.
For those that are interested, hit me up, and we can talk a little bit about it and how to individualize a program for you. But that's kind of where
we can go to the second part to the podcast and elaborate on that. Now, obviously, the testing that they're doing on these mice and yeast and now humans, if they find solutions for this and it is working, obviously that has to be coupled with the items you're talking about, nutrition and exercise. Otherwise, you take someone that's not caring about the nutrition and exercise, and then you're supplementing with a medication, I assume, or whatever, to then balance that out. That would you just get a slightly better non-healthy person, I suppose, just like everything else.
Right.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thought, and yeah, I mean, of course, the goal. I mean, if you're a biotech company and you want to develop a pill, your idea is to have exercise in a pill, right? You want, like, if you want to make $1 gazillion, you want to tell people, take this pill, and it's going to be like you exercised every day and you ate healthy. That's the magic gold standard. And actually, the closest thing we have to that is metformin. Metformin is a diabetic medication that we give to patients that don't need insulin yet. It's the first line diabetic medication. So someone who's insulin resistant, it has an impaired fasting glucose, so it's a little bit elevated. We're going to give them metformin, and and that'll bring your blood sugar down. What they've actually showed is people that are on metformin have better outcomes, and they do avoid other chronic diseases as well. So there's a lot of studies going on metformin. There's a trial called the TAME trial, TAME, to determine whether or not giving metformin to everybody just in their 50s, 60s, 70s will delay chronic diseases.
I guess, not to cut you off, I apologize. That's kind of what I was getting at, is these tests and studies are they focused in helping the people that are dealing with chronic disease, or are they, I mean, I obviously assume that's part of it, but are they also focused on the people that are healthy as a preventative measure to be healthier?
Yeah.
Both.
So to unpack that, so when they've done it in mice, for example, they've done it in just healthy mice. So they've taken a population of mice at the same age, and then they give them, they do a randomized controlled trial, basically, where they give certain mice, say, a supplement, and there's no distinction between whether a mouse is healthy or unhealthy. They're giving them the supplement, and overwhelmingly, the ones that get these supplements are living longer. When it comes to humans, it's a little bit more complicated because like half the population is sick. So when you have like 50-60% of the population that it's like it has like obesity, diabetes, insulin resistance, cardiovascular disease, it's a little more difficult. Certainly, overwhelmingly, what they find is that yes, exercise, for example, increases telomere length. Right out of the Mayo Clinic, we know this. It protects your DNA. It promotes longevity. You're doing high intensity interval CrossFit type workouts and training. You are protecting your DNA. You are maintaining telomere length, the little protective end caps on your DNA. That's what telomere is. Mm-hmm. And by doing HIIT training, CrossFit, you're going to preserve your telomeres. Simple as that. And that's whether or not you have a chronic disease or not. So that much we know. So these trials, it just depends on the trial, what they're looking at specifically. In the TAME trial, I'd have to look at the specific inclusion criteria as whether or not what's excluded for chronic disease. Are they taking people that have had a heart attack in the past, for example? Are they taking stroke patients, or are they just anybody over the age of 50,
right?
And trying to do so. I'd have to look at the specific criteria for that. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to the trial, it's different, depending on what it was, whether it was a mouse, whether it's human, dogs. But right now there's a study going on. You can ask your vet. I'd have to look up the exact name of it, but there's something that you can enroll. They have like 80,000 dogs enrolled in a trial for longevity, where they do different biomarkers. They've done one where they've given rapamycin, which is a medication, and that seems to have profound longevity effects. They've been able to reverse cardiomyopathy in dogs by cycling rapamycin. I'm not promoting it, and I would be clear, taking rapamycin forever at a constant dose is not good, but cycling it for a few weeks at a time, and they're working on the specific protocol, has been able to reverse chronic disease in different animals.
That's cool.
So I can make my dogs live longer?
I'm giving my dog NMN.
The best day ever.
Yeah, so in David Sinclair's book, he reveals what he takes, and one of the things he talks about is giving his dog NMN, a low-dose NMN.
What is that?
It's a sirtuin activator. It activates NAD and promotes mitochondrial health and DNA protection, but I don't know. He takes 1,000 milligrams a day. NMN is expensive, so it is one of the more expensive supplements. But he takes 1,000 milligrams, which is a lot. That's a lot of money. But I kind of, if you kind of estimate his weight and then you kind of look at your dog's weight, and I was like, all right, maybe about 300 milligrams or so. So she's about 70 pounds.
Yeah.
So I've been giving it to her. I didn't give it to her until she turned 1. Now she's a little over 1 year old. I started giving it to her, and we'll see. But yes, there is hope. We can make your dog live forever.
I mean, that's all you need to say, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it is an interesting thought, and I mean, I don't know, but there are trials going on right now for longevity in different animals, and yes, it's possible you can make your dog live longer.
Science is cool.
Yeah,
sure is.
Well, Vin, thanks so much for taking the time, and Sarah, thank you for jumping in with us here. And where can people, contact you when they have more questions? Obviously, we want to do another podcast to cover some more information from this, but where can they contact you?
So yeah, I'm on Facebook and Instagram, Vin Petronelli, or at Vin Petronelli. I just use my name, VIN, and my last name, Petronelli. Those are the best ways to get in touch. And yeah, reach out with any questions. If you see me in the gym or whatever, feel free to stop and chat. But yeah, reach out anytime.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
You got it. Thank you.
See ya.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode on The Boom Show, produced by the team at Burg CrossFit. Whether you're local to one of our locations or just love what we do, we would love to invite you to check out our in-house and digital offerings over on our website at www.burgcrossfit.com. If you feel stuck on a particular movement or have no idea what the heck a jerk is, definitely check us out on our movement library over on our YouTube channels, found at each one of our corresponding locations at Burg CrossFit, Burg CrossFit North, or Burg CrossFit Sunbury. And we'll see you next time.